traveled this 4th of July holiday. So let's get an update overall on the airline industry. Jared Belou's with us, Airlines Managing Director, S&P Global Ratings, and Fred Roeder, Managing Director, Consumer Choice Center. Jared, I'll start with you. I mean, we saw records. There was good news over Memorial Day. I'm not sure whether or not people expected July to really take off like it has, and some of the counts even began from last weekend. But what are you expecting here when you look at these numbers? What does it tell you, Jared?
Well, thanks for having me personally. I think what it tells me is Q2 is going to be another strong quarter. I think seasonally it's the strongest of the 4 quarters. Fares remain pretty high from what we're hearing. So I think it's going to be a pretty solid quarter from a revenue perspective. I think the question remains, how are costs going to be managed through this period? But I think overall it looks like Q2, at least from a revenue perspective, will be a strong one.
Yeah, so this will be nearly a 7% year-over-year increase, a new record. Fred, some of your thoughts. We know that the airlines actually had some price increases and they started to pull them down, I believe. I mean, you tell me, where are the prices and how does that sort of play in here?
Yeah, let's start with the good news. First of all, this summer, according to the US Consumer Price Index, will be the 3rd cheapest summer to travel in the last 10 years. Only the 2 COVID summers of 2020 and 2021 saw lower airfares in summer compared to this summer. So I would recommend people in the United States, travelers, to seize this opportunity and travel this summer because jet fuel prices are fairly low. And there are lots of cost drivers, especially on labor and maintenance, that would rather predict higher airfares in the future. So use the summer to travel and get on a plane.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. Are there certain areas that seem really a good value for a traveler to look at there, Fred?
I mean, right now, the FTC and the Biden administration are looking at low-cost carriers by stopping or making really hard for them to consolidate and merge. On the other hand, they want to fight so-called unbundled fees or fares. The FTC calls it junk fees. So they want to force the low-cost carriers to basically use the same model as legacy carriers used to do, because they also have unbundling. And this is something the federal government and some regulators really try to crack down, which will eventually lead to higher fares, because you'll be forced to purchase a check-in bag or a selected seat, even if you don't want to pay for it, and you're fine with having a middle seat in the last row.
You know, Jared, I know that you watch all things about this group, and I think about the credit ratings on these companies. I mean, some of them still have a lot of debt. Some still have to replace planes. Gasoline prices could be on the rise during hurricane season. For example, where do we stand as far how our American airlines are doing? We're showing here the earnings that are due out, Delta, United American, and Southwest, for the rest of this month.
Yeah, I think going forward, that's the question. I wouldn't expect to see much improvement in earnings, at least through this year relative to last year. I think that's a couple reasons. Even though the demand side of the equation is strong, and as I said, revenue should improve, there's limitations on capacity, so they can't necessarily grow as much as they would otherwise like to. Prices are remaining relatively stable, but the cost base has also gone up meaningfully higher from where we were last year, and that's a lot to do with labor agreements. And jet fuel prices have remained elevated, not at peak levels, but certainly causing some pressure. So, I think overall, the story from an earnings perspective is a really relatively stable one, if not slightly to the downside for some of the cost reasons. But on the flip side, you're getting some relief because of some of the delays in deliveries from new aircraft, and as a result, they don't have to spend as much necessarily on new aircraft coming in. And what we're seeing is that's having a positive effect on their cash generating ability, and presumably that should help benefit balance sheets to an extent.
Yeah. I mean, I just have a few seconds, but Fred, what were your thoughts on some of the fees? I mean, whether it's the baggage fees or get some food or a pillow or whatever.
These fees, of course, are not great, but they allow especially price-sensitive consumers, those who prefer to fly Spirit, Frontier, to get airfares at a more affordable price, right? We're not talking about the business traveler, but we're talking about price-sensitive consumers.
Yeah.
And by forcing these fees being included, we make travel more expensive, which makes it harder and less affordable for American consumers.